Board of Trustees meeting, December 5th, 2012. We're being taped, and the record shows the meeting starting at 7:16 p.m. First of all, welcome. Travis. Yes. This is the time for public comment. If there's any public comment, this is the time for it. Is there any public comment?
Excuse me, just a request. Public record.
Okay. Okay. So, the public records request for Martin Del Vecchio. We'll put that into the record later. And now let's move on. If there's no other comments, we'll go on to the review of the agenda. Tonight's agenda, we are going to review and approve minutes. We're going to discuss the site visit report. We're going to discuss the Board of Education, elementary and secondary education GCACS meetings. One behind us and one in front of us. We're going to review discussion concerning the short-term enrollment, September 2011. We're going to briefly discuss the upcoming move of the charter school office. And we're going to discuss lease adjustments, considerations for the next agenda, and adjournment. Okay. I'm sorry. Go to agenda? Sure.
Yeah. You're going to be in this one.
That's fine. Thanks. Okay, so the discussion for the board review is the executive session. It's part of the lease adjustments discussion, so thank you. Okay, so first for the review and approval of minutes, Eric, who is serving as our pro-term secretary, has produced minutes for us. Has everyone had a chance to read them? And if that's the case, do I hear a motion to approve the minutes?
I make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, there be no discussion, we have a vote to approve this. All in favor? Aye. Approved. Okay, item number 4, the site visit report. The board will discuss the site visit report and responses to it. The site visit is conducted annually for all charter schools that are in their first 5 years of charter. The purpose of the site visit is to provide the school and the Department of Education with an update on each school's progress towards the 5-year renewal of the charter. The board will review the site visit report, school leadership responses to it, and plans being put in place. We have a lot of educators on the board, so I'm open to having anyone else start this discussion.
Well, where to start? I had some questions actually about the report in terms of the accountability plan and the report on that accountability plan. So I have some questions on that. There have been a number of issues raised in the site visit report that the commissioner certainly focused on last week at the Board of Education meeting. I think the things I wanted to cover, or wanted to bring up today, one thing around the list of the conditions. As everybody in the room here knows, the school was under a set of conditions as we opened, 8 conditions that we had to meet, and there were a number that were met in the course of the last couple of years. There were a couple that were not met, and there were a couple of, actually there was one not met, and there were some that were partially met. The commissioner noted that some were met after deadline. Things like bringing on Aaron Solifo, for example, a person with expertise in public sector experience. My concern was that whether we actually had a proper documentation of all that was available to be presented for that report. So presentation of, well, the one condition that was not met is a report of all staff changes. And my question is really why that happens to be not met, since we already have a full list of 8 conditions that were met. So I don't understand why we didn't have a full report of all staff changes. Seems like we've been mentioning that quite diligently over the last 2 years.
Yeah. So we submitted actually both to the state audit and to the charter office, a full listing of email exchanges. I think it's interesting that, just as an aside, that the burden of proof is always put on the school and not also on the state. So the state should also be maintaining all of these files. In fact, we received notification, I contacted the charter school office when I heard that they were putting none of those, that particular condition, and asked for the names of those that were included in their accounting of it. Over half of those, we've already provided documentation indicating we had passed them on. Some may have also been made in the early stages by phone, because Barry Barnett contacted me and indicated he wanted, it was better for us to put them in email, and so that we would both have documentation. But, you know, the lion's share of them, we already have provided documentation. We're looking back through our own historic emails now to see if there are any further ones that we can provide. It looks like we have, out of, you know, an enormous number of communications, there may be a handful of staff where we missed communicating other than the 48 hours, which was noted in the first review of conditions, which I also objected to in the response to the conditions because they were notified by phone and they were actually here 2 days later. That was when, over the notification of David Nielsen's hiring. And 2 others, which was when the Director of Arts Integration was let go, until we actually had a final agreement with her on that, you know, it would have been inappropriate for us to indicate that that was finalized. So I'm not quite sure why we have a completely different accounting of it. We are resubmitting those documents to them. Where we would definitely not have communicated, and we have a disagreement on it, is that if a staff member completed their year's employment, then we didn't notify, starting with the oldest one being Chris Kent, who simply went on to another school at the end of the year, because we didn't notify him that Chris Kent wasn't coming back for the following year. And at the time, I didn't realize they wanted absolutely every indication of the staff. But that would be that one. Even the state auditors have indicated that certainly the school made every effort to communicate everything we thought we needed to communicate to them. So.
Just for the record, Tony, I think you said, notice about the Director of Arts Integration, I think you meant the head of school.
No, I was talking, the head of school, we actually, that actually was in the papers before we notified the state, so they obviously already knew by the time that came up. No, it was the one that they had noted in the first review of conditions was that when the Director of Arts Integration was let go in the first year, that we had not notified them, and it was actually because we hadn't reached an agreement with the Director of Arts Integration in terms of exactly how that would be handled. So,
Jane?
Yes.
I have a question on the site visit report.
Sure. It's time for it.
I guess this could be directed to Beth.
I'm
Well,
sure the protocol is here in this case. Does anyone have I think you're free to ask a question. Unfortunately, Beth, we forgot to include a sort of state of school thing on the agenda, so is there any procedural issue with that?
well, it has to do with simply whatever your topic is. Any of the conversation dialogue has to be directly to do with the topic.
Well, I'll direct it to whoever, but I was concerned about the discipline in the school during the site visit. The statement was most classrooms were disorderly. There was there was running around, there was a lack of order, and, I mean, did that happen,
I can answer that.
and why?
Board will chair recognize Beth.
If you like.
Thank you.
I would not say most, I would say some. And I will say that we have had a couple of classes that have challenging students, as well as both classes had teachers that were leaving, in the process of leaving, for different reasons. And we have since hired new teachers, and it's just, they're different classrooms now. So it was one day, and they have a responsibility as well, and they wrote what they wrote. I would say also that I've been very responsive to the site visit report, and since their visit, I've since constructed a behavior contract with our middle school students, and consequently have talked to them on a couple of occasions specifically to the contract. And we're addressing it. We're just trying to make it a value for them, the way in which they conduct themselves and the way they walk through the day. And you can even see that we have the core beliefs up around the school now, which we have started, but you know, we all came together in September. We've all taken responsive classroom together. We're all digesting it and turning it into practice. And it's an evolution. So this was the next step to do.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, I would just mention too, I think the other piece of that is, that Beth mentioned slightly there, is that this report and this visit took place on the 18th of October. Beth had been in the school all of maybe 6 weeks at that point. And there's been significant work since August on this very issue around school culture, around developing common expectations across classrooms, and common language. And I think it's taken time to get that language in place, and to have the standard by which that's measured in place. And, you know, I would wish that the department might have a visit later on in the year when they could see when this is a lot in place.
I hope
You know, to review a school that's on the basis of, that's under the leadership of somebody who's been in place for just weeks, and expect that it's all going to be in place and no questions asked, no questions to ask, is unfair. And I think, you know, the department has a job to do, and they do it well, and we have a reputation for that. And we have a charter, and we have an obligation to meet the responsibilities of that charter and the responsibilities to the state. And we stand by that. But I also would say that we need time, and Beth needs time, to
And the faculty.
pull these pieces together. And I would say that those pieces are coming together very rapidly. There have been some transition in a couple of staff in the last month or so. By all reports, some major improvements. And as Beth said, there's been work on the contract with the middle school students to establish some standards, not only with students, but to help parents understand what the expectations are as well. In all the states now, I mean, we've had some very successful PTO meetings, very well attended, I may add too. Like the last one I was at, last month, had probably 20 people in the room. That's very good turnout for any PTO in any school. And in a small school like this, that's exceptional, I think. So people, I think parents are seeing value in what they're getting here and in what their kids are getting, but also in what we're trying to do to engage parents as well.
I think one other thing that I'd like to comment on is the report of the educational plan, which supposedly was not fully in place when they came here, which is understandable. And for our friends who like to make comments in the paper about our illustrious leader, Jody Zebot, who is no longer here, that's why she's no longer here. There was no ed plan. And I'd like to go on record, Mr. Chairman, in saying that we now have someone who is working extremely hard in that area. And the plan is on its way. It was only how many weeks before they came? 6? 4?
6 weeks, yeah.
I just have to say though, because I don't even know Jody, but I know she worked really hard and
Yeah, she
And
might have
they-
worked very hard.
she did a lot of good work.
Right. I'm not
And
saying
I'm
she
on
did.
her shoulders now. I mean, what she started, I'm moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well-
and actually, there were curriculum maps that were presented to the department last October when we visited, or in November it was, that Jody had worked with the staff on. And again, my question is, why the visitors this year didn't see those in addition to the work that's been happening this year?
Yeah.
I know that, you know, we can even put all that aside and just talk about what work has been underway in the last 6 weeks.
Right.
More weeks than that now at this point, with under Beth's leadership, in terms of creating a coherent curriculum and in terms of unit development. And that's still underway. It's not gonna, it's.
Right. But we still have to deal with this report. It was not a good report. And we have to fix whatever is not fixed. And we have to work at whatever has not been worked at. You know, whether the school survives or not, this report is not good. And it's going to take a lot of work, and by all of us, and by the community, and by the students, and the teachers, and everybody. And hopefully it'll be a winning battle.
You know, Beth, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the other work you've done in terms of the focus on math, for example, the work on, you know, any assessment work the teachers have started to put in place? You know, there were some questions around that. Any of the documentation around curriculum, I think if you could add some more detail to that, I think that would be great.
Great. Well, what I sent out to parents this week were some bulleted items of where our work is headed and is at the present time. And I think that in some ways, the best thing we can really do is talk about honestly, what are the things we need to do? And concentrate on the future. So that's what I tried to do, was to say all along, actually, our goals this year reflect what the site visit report talked about. So in that regard, I'm feeling okay, at least, that the assessment made early on matched. And so what we're doing is, as a faculty, we are in the process of developing curriculum mapping document that includes all disciplines and builds common expectations vertically throughout the grades and horizontally across the year, with a special attention on incorporating state standards, school standards, meaning arts integration, community, thematic, interdisciplinary pieces, as well as essential questions and objectives. So when you have a document that looks like that, you have a roadmap. And when that's done, then you also have more opportunity to pay close attention to your practice, to your instruction, to the pedagogy that's behind the work that you do. So that would be my goal, is to get that done this year and try to uphold some of that other important component, or else it's a rather shallow document, if you see what I'm saying. It's just words. So we're trying to do both. I think if we can get that document done this year, though, it would be a real freeing feeling in some ways to start in September, knowing that we could just dig deeply into instruction and fine-tune things, if you will. So then the other component that we really have to pay attention to this year is working on some of that professional development. And the targeted areas would be understanding more deeply what inquiry-based and experiential learning looks like, and utilizing some 21st century strategies like I mentioned before, thinking routines. And the reason for thinking routines is about having students learn how to speak and how to uncover their own thinking and then reassess that themselves, be reflective in their own learning. The next one is uncovering complexities within math instruction. You know, math has changed, math education has changed so much for anyone my age and for maybe people even younger than me. And it's conceptual as well as skill-based. And it's really based a lot in literacy. If you can't read well, or if you have struggles in reading, it adds to the complexity of how you understand math. So learning how to teach that well is an area that we need to put some further attention, as well as giving teachers the skills to really analyze what it means, what student gaps look like, what are they, and then how do you analyze their progress. So the terms of data-driven and assessment-led instruction is all tied into that. And so we need to learn how to do that well, and that's one of our goals. It goes back to the mapping that I mentioned already, but just aligning literacy and mathematics, the practices of both of those, sort of singularly, if you will, is key. So not just mapping for thematic approach, but just mapping of how do you teach the literacy, all the literacy pieces, and all the mathematical pieces. And then building common assessments is another huge area that we have to pay attention to. You know, I think some of the problem before me is that there's been a large turnover. And we have to do a better job also of just documenting it and keeping it documented, if you will. And, you know, it's like handing the baton over. It needs to be given, but it needs to be given in a way that has a format that seems more universal. And that's another goal this year. Straightforward, but universal. Could work in any school.
And I would just add, Beth, if I could, that, you know, speaking about turnover, that staff turnover, I think we certainly have paid a price for the turnover in the past year. And, you know, I know, speaking personally, I've earned vacation time through training with staff who are no longer here. So that's a hot topic for me personally. But in addition to that, I think that you have started to establish a culture here where teachers feel that they have a voice in the school, that they're heard, that their participation in leadership is valued, and that it's a place where the staff feel that they can work collaboratively together. And you've fostered some vehicles for doing that through the introduction of the protocols that you talked about in the past. All of that, I think, in addition to the regular in-class observations that you do, reviewing their work, and the work you've done around having them share student work, student writing, and other work they're doing with their kids together as a school. So you start to establish some standards about what to look for in grade 4 writing as opposed to grade 6 writing. All of those things are help build the curriculum, but they're also building the staff and building the strength of the foundation for maintaining staff. So we can build on that over the next couple of years.
And it takes that much time to build a culture that really understands all of what you just said. I know that we are putting our attention on that, but I also know that building that takes time. You have to stay on course. You have to keep talking about student work, but you can't let up because it's hard work to do it. And it's human nature to say, let's just talk about something that's not so hard to talk about. And that's why protocols are so helpful, is to help that vehicle happen. The last two things I wanted to say that I noticed here on my paper is that we have to look at how we can build in remediation for students with math instruction. And we're starting that conversation now. In fact, we changed middle school configurations of some kids. And we think that we've regrouped the children in a better formation for them to get the math at the speed in which they should be getting it. And so we've already seen an improvement this week in terms of on-task behavior and interest because of the different formation. And then student behavior in general. We've already mentioned the importance of responsive classroom strategies and practice, but of course, again, it's the beginning of the year and everyone is learning how to do it and revisit what isn't working or trying it a different way. The inclusion of the student behavior contract, a strong partnership between home and school. You know, it's that piece that no matter how hard you work, you can't do it alone. And it is a joint venture. And then engaging curriculum affects student behavior. So teachers and I need to take ownership of student behavior as well. It's just a full circle experience. There was something you said, David, that made me think about, I guess just that, you know, I'm only as good as the staff. You know, it works that way. And that we work as a team because we're all invested in it. But it's not about me so much as it is about the team. It really isn't. Never is.
I have a couple of things going from the particular to the general. I think the Monday memo that you put out, Beth, has just been inspirational. And I think the example that you set for creating an opportunity for new parents to get involved in the evolution of the PTO is just wonderful. So it made me think of a book by Rafe Esquith called Teach Like Your Hair's on Fire. And I know that some days lately you have felt like your hair's on fire, but you're teaching and administrating, and I think it's just a wonderful example that you're providing everybody, so I encourage you to keep up the good work. The other thing, I want to go back to the site visit report, and some of the particulars are important to me as a board member, but overall, the most distressing part was in pages 25 to 31, which is the accountability plan piece. There were 31 items. 26 of those 31 were either not available, partially met, or not met, and 5 were met. And it's just disturbing to be puzzled so that we're handed that report, and it's fait accompli. In other words, that was all done, and so much of that information I thought was supposed to be sent to the board, or was sent to the board ahead of time. I just don't understand. I understand some of the particulars, the one that Ira mentioned, and I read the whole report. It's just, I didn't figure out the percentage of 26 over 31, but it's high in terms of overall. So I guess I need some coaching or information about why so many elements weren't even available. Some were partially met and some were not met at all.
Well, I think just to respond to the accountability plan in terms of its creation, I think it's something that should be addressed in your meeting with the department tomorrow with the support documents, which is that the accountability plan has actually been in process for over a year with the department. We have email exchanges going back and forth between me and Jody Seabarth and Allison Bagg in the department with regard to the creation of that accountability plan. In every one of our emails that we sent to her, it indicates we have incorporated all of your suggested changes into the document, and then we sent it back. Now, you would have thought, at least I thought on a number of occasions and said, I would hope we're getting close here, because both Jody and I had sent in, reviewed every suggestion they made. Each time they sent it back to us, incorporated all the changes they said, and sent it back. Now, you would have thought that it only takes one reading to identify the changes you want, and then you incorporate them. But in fact, you would send it back having incorporated all the changes they requested, and then they would send it back with more changes suggested, which we would then incorporate those, and it went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth over the course of over a year. And in fact, as you will note, if you look in our board of trustees minutes, I indicated that we should take the accountability plan as it had been agreed at that point, with all changes incorporated from the CSO, and we needed to vote to approve it so that we could meet that deadline, which we did, but then they still had further changes they wished to incorporate. So I would question the validity in the Department of Education meeting of indicating that after over a year, you don't have your accountability plan, when we've actually, as we can document it, every time we send it in, we've incorporated and got changes back, we incorporated them, and then we sent it back in. You would think simply to have those changes signed off, and then more changes were suggested, and went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and they were in.
So Tony, in terms of our meeting tomorrow, those of us who are going, do we have that paper document to, if they ask, to show them?
Yeah, well, I can forward to you actually the emails to trail back and forth between Allison Bag and myself and Jody Seabar with regard to those changes, which documents that each time we said, we've incorporated your changes, here's the document, and it going back and forth between them. Because I think it's disingenuous to actually indicate as though somehow the school just didn't bother doing the accountability plan. And in fact, we went back and forth numerous times with them, making adjustments to the accountability plan for them. And in fact, the accountability plan was already used in the second year site visit report. So, it's been used before and then used again. So I think it's something that really does need to be pursued with the department in terms of getting clarity on that particular process.
Okay, so do you have information that will say, this is when the first exchange happened,
Yes.
2nd, 5th, 20th, 18th, whatever, 18th and 20th? Okay, is that something you can send those of us who are going?
Yeah.
The accountability plan that we approved, was approved at the board meeting at the very end of August. I don't know the exact date off the top of my head. And the accountability plan that we voted on is attached to the minutes of that meeting. And to my understanding, that accountability plan was the last and final version of that. I've seen multiple versions of this too over the course of the last 2 years. And it was news to me to read in the CSO report that we don't have an accountability plan that's been approved.
Yeah.
Because this board voted on it,
Right.
and it's been a work in progress for 2 years.
Yeah, so then the question becomes, why wasn't that some kind of a statement about that included in the site visit?
Well, we don't have a ED from now. Well, good question. I have no idea. Also, it was given fairly stiff wording in obviously the report to the commissioner. And again, I would say a very disingenuous way of putting it, because, it implies, well, a year later they have no accountability plan. Well, obviously we have an accountability plan, and we can document the back and forth with the department repeatedly, in which each time we took on and incorporated the changes that they suggested. So I would really question, again, in terms of any kind of development of a plan, if you read it, you identify the areas of concern. The last email that we have indicates that there are some spelling mistakes, fairly simple, straightforward typos that they'd like to have corrected, and where they want them corrected. So, again, if there's something major there that would cause them to feel that we don't have an accountability plan, I'd like to know what it is. So, and then in terms of the other issue, has to do with items not met on the accountability plan. And in the education section of the accountability plan, there are a couple of areas. This is the area that Jody would have overseen last year. And there is one section of that particularly in which the original plan that was put together, I think Dave actually suggested using this Chicago consortium, this group of surveys. Well, those are surveys that should be conducted during the course of the year. And when I found out that they had not actually been done, the Chicago consortium surveys, and we went to try and get them off the website, it turns out that they no longer provide them free for any kind of use. So we don't have access to that particular survey anymore. And so they were not done before the end of the year. and I didn't realize they had not been completed, so.
Yeah, so we don't need to pursue that anymore. I just want, if the question surfaces tomorrow, I want us to be able to.
Oh, definitely, without any question at all, we can document the entire string of emails going all the way back, what the suggestions were, what the issues were.
Okay.
And I think we have a really valid question here around both the indication of the accountability plan, the work that went into it, and the way that took place. So I think it should absolutely be pursued.
Tony, isn't there a provision that allows us to write a rebuttal to the plan and attach it and
It's
go?
a site visit report, correct?
Do we have a time frame on that, or is there a?
I haven't heard.
Okay, so we can put that together and put it in there.
I think so. Yeah.
Alright.
The other thing that I think we should have on record as well is that the site visit in the second year, which was actually in the school's 11th month, that we also have the documentation from Joanna Legetto of the department where she indicated that she had scheduled us for February 2nd of that year. And, every school has to respond to the pre-scheduled date indicating if there are any issues around it. I responded on the day indicating that February 2nd would work out very well for us. It was going to give us a little bit longer with the larger population of students and staff in that second year to have things up and running very much the same way we would prefer to have that this year. And the department then got back to us and said that because the commissioner wanted to have the site visit completed before our meeting in November or December of that year, that they were moving our site visit from February 2nd when it was originally scheduled to October. So that's why in the second year, we had our second year site visit in our 11th month. So this year, for the very much the same reasons, the turnover in staff, new educational leader in the building, and barely 6 weeks of them working together. And so they indicate they want to have our site visit again in October to be representative of our third year. So essentially, we have a site visit in our 24th month of existence. And I requested that they move it, that I can understand this sometimes has to happen. Department has a lot of schools they need to do reviews of and site visits of. And could they this time, since we get on October for our second year, for our third year, couldn't we have it in the spring, which would be more reflective of a third year visit and would give what they knew to be a significant new staff, because they had all the staff changes, they knew who we hired, they knew what the turnover was, to provide them with longer to get together. And just to sort of underscore the comment that Dave's already made, that this is the Department of Education. They're educators. They know what turnover staff means. They know what it does to an educational institution. They know they need time to do work together, to get to know the students, get to know the challenges of that particular student population. And yet they chose to do a third year site visit in October of the beginning of the third year. And I would question that as being a valid decision. And obviously, it's not a valid reflection of a third year, particularly for a school that started on September 23rd of its first year. So I think there's actually a whole slew of issues that should be addressed tomorrow in the meeting and in writing in response to the site visit, to statements made in the site visit report, and to laying out some of the enormous work that has been done already in the building in a very short period of time.
So I'm wondering if, in the spirit of time, we can move on to.
Sure, I think that Tony raises a good point, which is that we do need to spend some time this meeting discussing our strategy for the George School Office tomorrow, and the things that might help us, make the case that we want to make, because we have some goals there that we can discuss. So,
James, I just want to say that.
yes,
I think it's, Tony's raised a number of these procedural timing kind of issues, which I think are valid. And I think that we need to make our case on that. I don't want to just have the impression out of this meeting or out of anything that we make as our presentation or statement to the department or anybody else, that that's the main basis of our case. The main basis of our case is that we have a strong leader in place, and there's much work underway last year, but we have had some serious turnover, and no school can have that kind of turnover without having some major impact on the program. And we're feeling that impact at this point. So I think, we need to make that case. I think we also need to be, I would hope as a board that we could recognize that we need to own some of this ourselves, that our decisions about where we spend our time are not always the best decisions. I think we've spent an awful lot of time, for example, on whether we're going to renew Tony's contract over the course of the last 9 months. That was all time that we put in that could have been spent on some other things, on enrollment and other things. I think we've learned some hard lessons, a hard way, and I think we are getting refocused very well this fall. And in terms of enrollment, I think we've made some real strides, both in terms of engaging parents, thanks to Travis, particularly, to bringing in the involvement of faculty as well as board involvement, a big outreach effort, a really pretty good showing at the open house in November. We had 10 new people come in November to the open house that are interested in enrolling in the next year. And people may say that's just 10 interested families, but that's a good turnout in November. So I think we've made some very good headway on that, and I think we're getting refocused on what we need to make as our priorities, and what are the next steps going forward. So I hope we can make our presentation that, yes, there's been procedural issues that we have some disagreement about, but we also agree that many of the issues raised are legitimate, that we're working on those very issues, and that we take them seriously, and frankly, there is a sense of urgency on this board to make that happen.
Any other comments on the site visit report? Okay, thanks very much, Dave. Why don't we move on into the EESE meetings that took place on November 27th, and the preparations for them that will take place on December 18th. Just to dovetail on what Dave said, when I had my 3 minutes to speak in front of the board, I did say that we acknowledge and specifically in reference to a letter, I think it was written November 16th by Commissioner Chester, where he sort of took in the site review visit and his other work with the order of conditions and everything else. And I think when I think he's smart to come out and say, we've read what the commissioner's concerns are. I think the key language the commissioner said, he always had some concerns about the school, but his concerns were never as great as they are now. I think and I said, we share those concerns. We have understood where our shortcomings are. We appreciate the fact that the commissioner in his letter also noted some of our strengths, which is a very, very strong improvement in MCAS and DLA, very, very good work in arts integration, and the terrific redoubling of the effort to really put this very big SPED program together, which is all those commissioners' letter. But I did tell them that we took the concerns seriously, and we were working on plans to make sure that we have evidence-based action plans going forward to show where we are making that kind of progress. I addressed the things, Dave, that you were just talking about, where I think one of the things that the Department of Education is most concerned about is the enrollment trend, and they are fine with us going from 60 to 130, but not fine with us going from 130 down to 121 or 2 or whatever. So that's a big issue. We've always been told that 5 years is the time for giving to work out the problems, and my concern is that 3 is the new 5. that they're looking to say it's tight economy. We're looking at all sorts of budget cuts across the board, all sorts of funding at state levels, and what do we do with a situation where we're not going in the right direction? I did also advocate, I said, I think we are going in the right direction. We do have these plans together with the staff. We have a very, very full, robust program. We had a question of finance came up, and I was very frank about where we were with our lead creditor, our landlord, and how we have some room to work there. We should have good finances. But more importantly, that I think the review at the 25th month, as was pointed out earlier, was really too premature to draw a full characterization of the school's progress. And I did ask that they try to come back and revisit the school later in the year. I don't know if that fell on deaf ears or not, but the point I would make is that we do have to, as long as these people have done their work, they've done their review, and whether we agree or not, and there's certainly room to disagree. I think the real the strategy at this point, anyway, is to say, okay, we heard you, we've put things in place to change this. Just give us the opportunity to show that we can affect those changes. Now, and then Beth spoke and talked about the kind of changes that she was going to show, the kind of experience the children are having here. I think that made a good impression as someone who both understood the nature of the challenges here, and also someone who could bring the arts and innovation to the fullness that it can be here, the staff that we have, and also someone who can bring rigor to the academic program, which I think is what they're also looking for. So, again, I'm not the academic, I'm not the one that opine on this, but I thought that was a very good talk on what our challenges were and how she will direct them to be met. After we sat down and had our moments, we then the commissioner got up and then made his speech, and I think we were all frankly surprised. In the past few years, he always said, this is 5 years, we're going to give them this, we'll put them on probation, take them off probation, review the order of conditions and how we're doing with that. But when he expressed his sentiment, I can't remember his exact words, but I think he said at the next meeting I would entertain a motion for a revocation. In the third year, I was really surprised because I had signaled the government in a second. That was a real blow to the gut. So where we are now is we've had that meeting, and we've got another meeting on the 18th. The CSO meeting tomorrow is sort of intermediary step. Where we work with the CSO on, we'll go back to the board. What we're doing, I think, at the school right now, with the parents' organization, is terrific work in terms of providing some support. And we hope to have a pretty robust offering when we go back on the 18th. So to say what's going to happen, but Commissioner Chester was decidedly a different person that we had in terms of his view of us. So I'm not in any way soft on this. It's a very serious matter, and I think we're taking a lot of different steps. We've had, I think some of the things we can be proud of, as David alluded to earlier, was the incredible work of enrollment. We've had 2 open house weekends, and we did get some students from the first one, and we got some attend from next year. We had a very, very good turnout for kindergarten 1 this year, our new grades, and if that trend continues, and it's a very appealing option for parents, we have a very, very strong base it's about close to 20%, 15-20% of the student base coming in every year at the beginning. That would make for a very, very strong student population going forward. Again, the finances are an issue that the school's concerned about for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But I think one of the really strong parts is the parts that have been put in place with Beth and those that have worked on the curriculum plan and evidence-based action plans to show that we actually can provide the meaningful engagement, significant education and environment that the charter promised. Anyway, so I'll stop there, but so we have a meeting in 2 weeks from yesterday, and our preparation meeting for tomorrow's meeting will be very insightful in terms of what we've learned from the CSO and how we need to respond to that. We'll be also listening as well as talking at the meeting tomorrow to see what they want. So, any other comments?
I'd like to just make a comment. I find it ironic that Chester is now saying he's really concerned about us. I have been involved with the school for 2 years, and I have to say, currently, I think we have the strongest staff, and like Beth said, a school is only as good as its individual teachers. We have an exceptional number of very talented teachers, and a principal who is able to get the very best out of her staff. The staff is here at 7:30. I know because I'm here some mornings at 7:30. They stay at 4 or 5, and they're doing it happily and are eager to do the very best for their kids. This is a good school and great teachers. But Dave, like Dave said, we have issues. We have to work on them. We have to be more diligent as a whole. But for Chester to say, now he's concerned, this is when we're on the right track, and they're really strong, and for him to take it now is really refreshing. I just feel really excited about it. But like Dave said, we do have things to do, and Beth knows them, we know them, and we're working hard. I mean, everybody's been involved in the school hours and hours. I don't know of another board who has so many people working hour after hour, and certainly our principals in here, all, and our husbands in here. Everybody's working very, very hard. The kids are happy. I wish some people could come and see the art classes, they could come and see our gym classes, come and see we had trouble with 2 teachers. One teacher had a son who was very, very ill and had to leave, and in the 3rd week of school, it was a tremendous blow to our kindergarten. It was very hard to readjust. We've met challenge after challenge. We've got a strong staff. And it makes me angry to think that people are trying to put every roadblock in our face and divert our attention. It's really disconcerting and nasty. Sorry.
Thank you, Susan. I think you raised a good point about the quality of the experience that visitors have when they come here. And part of the work that we're doing is work with Tasman, Dave was alluded to earlier, about really making a strong campaign to bring more visitors to the school.
They can see what's happening. You'd be impressed. Come and see us. Come and see the school.
Yeah, I actually, I'd like to suggest another idea. I don't believe the commissioner makes statements like he did last week lightly. And I do think that in the current educational environment in Massachusetts and across the country right now, 3 is the new 5, is the new 5. That the time frame for schools to demonstrate performance, regardless of what the circumstances may be, and Lord knows we've had circumstances here, that has changed, and it's a shorter time frame. And my feeling personally, and I'm speaking only personally here, not for anybody else on the board, is that we really need to change up our game significantly. And what I mean by that is I think that we need to come up with another way for this school to succeed. And the way that I think that could happen is to address the current rift in our community over the school that is destructive to the community and it's destructive to schooling and to education. And I think what I propose is that we revisit a proposal that was made some years ago about rechartering this school as a Horace Mann charter school. A Horace Mann charter school, for those of you who may not be familiar with that, is essentially an in-district charter school. It's a school that is created, most traditionally is created by a district as a kind of incubator for innovative practices and educational practices. I believe that even if we clear the hurdles in the next couple of weeks with the commissioner and so forth, that the school is still going to be operating under a cloud. We've been operating under a cloud for 3 years. And I think that's going to continue unless we start to address the climate in our city and give the school a chance to live, to even just breathe. I've actually put together a letter that's written by me, not by the board. It's a proposed letter that we could submit to the commissioner and to the Board of Education, to the Secretary of Education. And I'll pass out copies of that. So essentially what I did here is to outline the need for this, try to provide some background about the fact that the school, as Secretary Revel noted during the BSE meeting, that the school has had very little opportunity to really thrive. And that the campaign against the school has been a significant distraction to the business of actually educating kids in this school. So that's the first point. I do make a case around the financial viability issue, and that we are moving ahead with many steps to address that, both in the short term and in the long term. And talk to about the recent open house and the success of that. I also point to a number of things that we're doing to build the academic program, particularly noting the work that and the leadership that Ed has shown in the last couple of months here, just her first few months here, particularly citing the fact that she's worked specifically to address many of the issues that came up in the charter school office report, to address staff issues, around building the culture where staff are going to want to stay here and maintaining that, to address parent issues around communication and follow through, and to address the core issue around academic rigor. And I think Beth has already outlined a number of the steps that have been taken on that. I tried to identify a few of those in this letter. I also mentioned that many of these steps that we're taking are actually based on current educational research by Doug Reeves, by Bob Marzano, and are actually strategies that are in the Department of Education's own conditions of school effectiveness, a document that's used widely across the state. So the main case there is the point I made earlier, that Beth has been here a very short time. She's made significant changes. We have a very well-founded staff at this point. They need time to make this school really come together and to get it on track. And I believe we're really on that track already. We need time to move down that track. The other thing I want to point out in the letter is that we recognize that we have work to do, but we also know Gloucester kids. We've learned that quite personally at this point, and all of us on the board and the staff and everybody else involved. There's a lot of challenges to educating many of our students in this school and in this city. We have that shared challenge, actually, both within the public district and within the charter. Ray Lamont actually made a statement to that same effect in a recent editorial about the fact that if this school closes, what happens to the kids that we're serving? And we know that we're serving kids, some kids here, very well. There are students who graduated last year who said this school is the best thing that's ever happened to them. And if you talk to the students who attend to this day, you'll see the same kind, you will hear the same kind of comments, and you'll see the same kind of anticipation and eagerness to be here. So I then make a case around the fact that there are many kids who have not fared very well in the current system, and that if this school closes, that will be a tragic failure for this community. It's not just the death of a charter school, it's the death of an idea about how to improve education for all kids in the city. So as my question there at the end of that is, you know, the vision of the school was really about creating a place in which all students feel a deep sense of belonging. And we know that many of the kids here feel that, and that vision is alive and well in this school. So the question is, what will become of that vision if this school closes? And I don't believe that vision should be revoked. I think we need to move ahead and make it happen. So the proposal is that we, as a board, would agree and make this proposal together to the Commissioner, to the Department of Education, to the Board of Education, that this school be rechartered as a Horace Mann charter school. And that I've actually taken some time to lay out a plan about how that might happen. We recounted a little bit of the history about some of the early discussions around Horace Mann charter schools, and outlined some of the rationale for this change, why Horace Mann charter school makes sense. And to list some of those right now, I think it would maintain choice for parents, would promote additional educational opportunities for students, especially those who are most at risk in the city. Would build on the district's current Innovation Schools initiative of Bailey, to build an additional incubator for innovative practices. Renew the city's focus on education instead of political attacks. Foster a renewed alliance between citizens about education across the communities, both within the charter school and across the entire city with the rest of the public school system. To encourage exchange of teachers and expertise among schools, something that we've been talking about in this school for 3 years now. To resolve any pending litigation concerns for the Department of Ed and for the Commonwealth, and to provide needed school space as the district moves to replace Fuller Elementary School. So you'll see in the draft that I've outlined here that I laid out a timeline of how this might happen, beginning in January, a transition phase in which there will be discussions between this board, Department of Ed, and Gloucester Public Schools. And I'm not going to go detail by detail here, but I've broken it out by month as to what steps might be taken each month, with the idea that by July, the school would be rechartered as a Horace Mann charter school, and there would have been a significant amount of planning put in place by that time to make it possible to open in September as a Horace Mann. I also proposed some terms and conditions. One of those being that funding would remain the same for this year, and that as a Horace Mann charter school from that point forward, the actual budget would be determined by the district. And we need to work through, we need to have some negotiations about the details of how that would work for sure. I would also propose that we as a board would take a sacrifice. And that I think to make this a credible plan for the state, that we need to put on the table that we are willing and would move toward reconstituting this board. Not that all board members would be gone, because I think it's important to maintain continuity, maintain the vision of the school, but there would be a process by which we could bring in some new personnel on the board. And that would involve also some mediated discussion between the Department of Ed, this board, and the public school system. Another proposed term and condition would be that Beth and the current staff would remain in place through the end of June, the end of the school year, that Beth would retain her position through the next school year, and that any hires or fires would be left in her hands as to whether she wants to move ahead with those. So the determination on staffing will remain with the Director of Education. Another term around ensuring that the board, once reconstituted, would maintain some independence and some autonomy from the district. So the idea with the horseman, as it's laid out in statute and in practice in the state, is that a horseman has a board, such as ours, that operates, makes decisions in terms of hiring a director, in terms of budgetary allocations, and governance by itself. It's not governed by the superintendent or by a school committee. Again, details to be determined, but I think we can negotiate some of that. I'd also want to see some long-term protection for our current landlord financially, and make sure that's built into any agreement around this. And that there be an agreement to terminate all litigation, pending or otherwise, and any other activities to oppose the well-being of the school, including all legal challenges, public attacks, and any other activities deemed to be destructive to the success of this agreement. So the last couple of pages in the document are material that's taken from the department's website, Q&A, about how our horseman charter school works, both in terms of governance and in terms of funding. And there's plenty of other material you can access on the department's website as well. So that's the proposal that I would like to put on the table as a topic of discussion and something that for consideration by the board.
David, I have one question. Can you explain in a short sentence or paragraph, what is the difference in the funding? As it now exists and a Horace Mann funding?
The funding for a Commonwealth charter school, which is what we are, comes directly from the state in the form of reimbursement.
Yeah.
The funding for a Horace Mann charter school it can come in two different ways, but the important piece that I think you're getting at is that the budgeted amount is determined by the school committee.
By the public school?
Yes, yeah, because it's an in-district school.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is that as I said earlier, the board is a separate entity, makes its own autonomous independent decisions. And there is provision in statute that the funding for any horseman charter school cannot fall below what the allocation to the other schools of the same grade span would be within the district. And there's actually an appeal process to the state if there's any violation of that. Okay, but that would be worked out in detail.
You can state the question again.
Yeah.
There is no other school in the district with that grade spans in the state of this logical.
Okay, so maybe my wording is not on point there.
Well, it probably still apply because what they do a formula out in terms of the middle and elementary school, so.
It's based on the district formula.
Just before we start, I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions about this. Dave, with the innovation school right here, can you explain the difference between innovation school and a horseman school for, there's a different,
Yeah.
sort of touched upon the independent board, that's definitely important. Right.
And so I studied this a couple of years ago, so my recall on innovation schools is a little rusty. But essentially, innovation school is again, in-district school that agrees to adopt some new innovative practices in the classroom. And there is some additional funding provided by the state. There's a startup amount of money that Gloucester received, for example, for the program at Olean. And then there's, I believe it's $75,000 that's provided to the district to
Training.
implement that program. the idea with innovation schools was, it came about under Governor Patrick's administration as a way to try to foster more innovation within within the auspices of the district. Because of some of the controversy that we all know rather well about charter schools in the state. You know, Secretary Revel has been, I've heard him say that he spends, I don't remember the percentage now, but let's say 30% of his time on a group of schools, namely charter schools, that represent a much smaller percentage of the actual student population in the state because of this controversy.
The important part of this proposal is the partnership that would form with the public school system. The sharing of facilities, talent, and students. Cooperative efforts to make sure that students are taken care of in this city. I read the 2009 Massachusetts Secondary School Principals Evaluation of the high school, that 10-year evaluation that was done 2008, 2009. I don't know whether any of you have read it. The bottom line is 47% of the students graduating high school, only 47% go to 4-year schools. It's one of the lowest numbers in the state. I mean, it borders with some of the real urban cities. And this city needs to improve. And this would help. Because all these kids in grade 8 all funnel into the high school, like everybody. From the innovative school, from a charter school, a Horace Mann, everybody funnels into 9 through 12 at Gloucester High School. They're all products of all these different phases, and it's so important. I wish more people would understand that.
Dave, were you suggesting it would be type 1 or type 2?
There's actually 3 types.
I saw that, but we're not both.
Yeah. I think that just says it has to include some schools.
So would our teachers not be union teachers? Is that how we can?
So, yeah, I think it's a good question, Gordon. Yeah, and I've been thinking about that and driving back and forth to work for the last couple of weeks. I think any of the nuts and bolts details like that are subject to any kind of negotiation we might have, any discussion we might have about this.
Were you thinking that this would be a proposal we might make just before the meeting?
Just to further that a little bit, I think under the type 3, the horseman 3 in the state statute, it is possible for a horseman charter school to be exempt from some of the collective bargaining agreements that are true in other schools. So that's, the option there is available.
Were you suggesting, game changer, woo. Were you suggesting we do this at the meeting of the 18th or prior to, or would this be one of the solutions? Just politically speaking, would the opponents of the charter school, like our Republican leaders in Tea Party Congress, would they take that deal while they still thought they had the chance of snuffing us out? Or is that the whole negotiated kind of settlement at a meeting? How do you know the answer would be yes in Gloucester, just because it seemed like a good idea when the charter was happening? But now...
I don't know that Gloucester Public Schools would think this is a great idea. I do know that Councilor Toby brought up this very idea just in October at City Council. I believe the school committee took it up soon thereafter as well, briefly.
I
don't know, I haven't read school committee minutes lately, been a little busy, but.
I can't imagine these
No.
guys here would
I think
think
there
it
was
was a good
discussion
idea. I don't think these guys,
So,
you know.
I don't want to make assumptions about what anybody in this room or anybody else in the city think. I think there are certainly enemies of this school, but I also think there are plenty of people of goodwill on both sides. And you know, I'm an optimist. I believe that we can get over our differences and try to move ahead with what's best for the kids in our city, because of some of what I was pointing to is, I think everybody recognizes there's room for improvement, and I'd like to work together on that rather than be working on this political battle that's not getting any of us any further.
And I think your idea of addressing it that way is absolutely fabulous. I read the whole thing. I certainly think a lot of our leaders would find this great, but I don't know that the warring parties are not, just like Congress. People, if they think they can snuff you out, they'd rather do it that way. But that's up to you for moving us. And
James?
I was just going to say,
Beth was.
Beth would be happy to recognize, the chair would be happy to recognize.
Do you want to say something first?
No.
I wanted to ask a question and to say, first of all, I don't think you can sleep in, but amazing idea. But sequence, could you just, what do you think? Is this something that, if in fact the board cares to move forward on, the sequence of timing, is it to be brought to tomorrow's meeting as a consideration, or is it to be brought to the 18th?
Tomorrow.
I was just wondering what they thought.
I don't know. I do weigh on this one. This is first of all, Dave, thanks for the work for doing this.
Great work.
Obviously, took a lot of time to get this done. This was a lot of thought. I was at a Charter School Association meeting earlier in November, and Chester was there talking about how he embraces partnerships, he embraces these kind of things. This is really the whole hallmark of what's going on in Lawrence right now, and other places where he's really trying to bring the Department of Education in to alleviate some of these difficult school situations that just aren't going where they should. Having said that, this is a pretty tall order to fill in terms of, I think, the proper board procedure is to everyone take this home, review it, and have a discussion at our next meeting. We can certainly, as Commissioner Chester, the reason I brought this up about the charter school meeting early in November is he's open to hearing about ideas that people have for partnerships or some kind of developments. There may be a way to, discuss this with him, but I think that the correct procedure is to have the board really discuss this first after some thoughts and due diligence, and really consider what this means, and not only what it means in terms of what goes on within the four walls of the classroom, but what it means in terms of the district team and the lines of the city. There's a lot in this in terms of what we're proposing that honestly I don't think we could pull together by the 18th, or even and we will have a meeting at some point in whatever our January meeting is, and I would ask that at that point we, depending on the outcome, we'll have an agenda, and we can bring that up then. I'd certainly not discourage any kind of interim work on this. If there was a reason to have a special meeting about this, Dave, that's all within our capability. I was just kind of surprised it's not really on the agenda. I guess it comes in under the BDSE meeting. Preparation for the meeting. I know you've been working on this. I think you'll be looking at this right now.
Jeff, can I just something
Yeah, sure.
what you just said? I hate to keep bringing politics up. However, it's always different before. This isn't as strong if you get your charter revoked as it is if you submit it before the issue is out. Because now you have a charter and you have a bargaining position. It's like the fiscal cliff, I hate to say it. Or the ones the Republicans have, the debt extension. Dave's nodding, and I sort of see, with all this work, it is a dramatic thing. We wait till January, and we've gotten a no. It's like,
Let's see, we've got a couple people here, I think, Art, maybe you're here first, then we'll do Jay and then Ira.
We have this, we'll take it home, we'll study it, we can have a meeting tomorrow, and then we can call another Board of Trustees meeting before the 18th to make a decision, and then it may be, in terms of the political piece, it may be timely to get that material to the commissioner prior to that meeting. I'm just guessing.
I get so a point of procedure here, at the meeting, if, when they have a vote to revoke, there's a process.
That's not the vote.
That's not the actual, this is exactly, thanks Jay, you're about to talk about that, so why don't you?
Well, just as a small point, the commissioner will entertain a motion to close the school, and they might vote an intention, but they can't do anything about closing the school because there's a process that then follows. They have to have a hearing, which we get to present our case, and several other things. A couple of us have been researching this. So it's, so that although we need to have our act together and present our case and show what we're doing to remedy, things that we know need remedy, it's not like the door shuts on the 18th. That begins a process in which we have further say.
it's like impeaching the president. They just vote to begin the process, and then they have to remove him from office.
With that said, I think it's still, I think Gordo's point is where my thinking's been going is we have a much stronger case to make if we make it now. If there's a vote to revoke and there's a revocation vote, we can present information on those things, but I'd rather not have a revocation on the books, and they will start talking about how we can continue our school rather than be defending where we are still. I'd rather have our energy directed that way.
James?
Ira, sorry, can you do Ira, please? I'm sorry.
We should have an indication tomorrow after your meeting where the charter school board is in this. I think they're going to give you an indication of how they feel and what their recommendation is, correct?
It's hard to say, I can't read their minds, I don't know what's gonna happen at all. I mean, basically, the invitation was extended as they wanted to left a message and said, if you want an update on the status of the school.
Okay.
And so, on its face, I think going back to the three things we were talking about before, which is the enrollment plan, the evidence-based action plan, and the finances, I think those are the three key ingredients of the current status of the school.
Right.
Now, we'll be making our case for why we think we're improving or whatever shape we're in. But, as I said, we're also going to listen to hear what they have to say. So I cannot predict what will happen there. I don't know the again, I can't read these people's minds, that they really want to look at what's going on here right now. I don't think it needs proposal. I think the Board of Education might entertain this. Again, Chester is very aggressive about pursuing partnerships. I think that's a possibility. Again, who knows? What a handicap for the odds is going for that. But I don't think that we're going to have get this strong sense of whether this particular proposal is extremely palatable tomorrow.
Well, what I would like to recommend is that tomorrow's meeting, we set a board meeting for next week, as early as possible next week, maybe a Tuesday, before the 18th, to talk about what happened yesterday and ready for a plan to present before this vote is taken, even if it's a vote to consider a change in the school. I think we should be ready with this. And it should be in someone's hands. I don't know whose.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons we pushed the meeting forward from the 12th to today was to get some.
Get ready for tomorrow.
Get ready for tomorrow, so.
Okay, so after tomorrow, I think we should have another meeting next week. I mean, there's no law that says we can't, right?
There was a time when we used to, there were a lot of meetings, hours ago. So
I think we should meet definitely before the 18th.
Okay, well, we have some time to review that, and again, yeah. of course-
So I'm making a motion.
Well, I would say, well, no, we don't have to make a motion to do that, it will be part of like meeting the next schedule. I think depending on the information we get back from the CSO tomorrow. If there's something that really feels like it would necessitate a second meeting in December, then I think it would make perfect sense to want to do that.
Did the CSO, were they the ones who conducted the site visit?
Yes.
Since the beginning of the school, the CSO might smile and say, you guys are the greatest, but they don't always do it on the other side. So I don't know that you're gonna get any answers that I would call straight from that tomorrow.
We may not, though, through the chair, I just want to
Unless we ask.
go back to sort of in Dave's comments, I think, and his proposal. I think the central component of it, separate from the detail, is to try to move to a situation where the antagonisms and adversarial approach taken by all sorts of elements in the city, including the government and Department of Education, all with different agendas that move further and further away from kids and learning. And what I really like about the proposal, without even knowing all the detail, I mean, I've only looked at it just now very briefly, but what I like about it is that whether it's Ray Lamont's article or its comments from here around the town, this is being a long 2.5, 3-year slog. And it has done damage to innumerable people, individuals, to good teachers. It has done damage to friendships, people who were friends and now no longer are, kids who used to play together and now no longer do. And if you move towards a revocation, however that goes, it will actually permanently solidify in the history of the city and all those who participated the absolute failure to put kids first, all kids, because despite what's being said in the press, these are all cluster kids, the vast majority of them. And they should be at the core of decision-making for every group, from the commissioner and the Department of Education to those who have fought the battle for reasons that they define also by kids. Worry about community schools that could close if they consolidated community schools and did away with it and put them all in some large factory school. You know, there would be really legitimate points raised on every single side. Questions about the chartering process. Did politics get involved? You know, we may never know the answers fully to all of those questions. But if we go forward with staying adversarial, not exploring an option which gives the opportunity for people to get on that board together and put kids first in this city, all kids, all Gloucester children, then we will put in stone all that anger, all that adversity, and it will become a permanent part of the history of the city. And it will continue to do damage to the kids who are here, to the kids who would like to have come. Instead of finding out, is there a way to explore before we go down to this process, which will further raise questions. It'll raise questions about, you know, Chester, Revelle, politics, you know, are these still part of the decision making? Is this why we're moving so quickly to put revocation on the table? What are all the different pieces of this? But instead, is there a way before we get anywhere near that any further, to finally come to the table, have a discussion, put it out there as an invitation? You don't even know whether it's going to be this plan or parts of this plan or something else.
No.
But is there a group from the mayor to this, members of the school council to members of the opposition who would come here on a regular basis? Some group willing to get together and have a conversation about, isn't there a way where you could move to something in which we all buy into it? We all have a part of it, and the healing can start in the city and put kids first. And that, more than the detail, detail's going to take a long time to work out. But what I really like about it is it's a proposal that's about kids, and not just the survival of this school, but the survival of choice and change educationally in the city. Isn't that a good thing? You know, and why not find a way? I think if we don't find a way to at least put it on the table as a suggestion in the meeting tomorrow, it doesn't have to be a board suggestion. We had a meeting facilitated by the commissioner with members of the school committee, not a quorum, members of the board, not a quorum, nothing binding, but at least to explore possibilities. And isn't it time to do that before, if it even goes to the meeting of December 18th, and you move to that kind of indication, it will do damage to this school, and it will have solidified exactly what has to not happen in the city. What a stain to go down in the history of the city that this is where we ended up. We ended up leaving it in an adversarial, negative, full of different agendas and different constituencies process.
So I
That
got
put
the
kids
idea.
last. Yeah, I don't even know all the detail of it. But what I like about it is it's about kids, it's about coming together, and it's about working together. It's about collaboration. And what I don't doubt, even remotely, and never had, and have had good conversations with the most ardent members of the opposition. And I have never doubted once that this was personal, never doubted that they cared about their kids, just like parents in our board and other parents care about their kids, and that there are good teachers in this school and in every school in Boston. And why not try to come to the table and have that be what goes into the history books about this effort, not the other story. So I would just suggest, I think to have a meeting next week is important. I think it's important to find a way to at least present this as we're interested in exploring options and put them out there and contact those who might also be interested and find out if they're interested.
I have a comment, but first I'll defer to Beth. She's been my
the board, chair.
I just wanted to say that I called the clerk's office this week because I wanted to know how to be prepared for tomorrow's meeting. And I talked with one person and played phone tag with another, but the feedback I got was that we should just come, it's going to be a conversation, and it's going to define some next steps. So I just want to share that with you. And then I wanted to say that my one thought, sort of similar to Gordo, is that I would just like to put on the table that we've had a roller coaster fall. And the more I understand it's complex, and I don't have an answer for you in terms of the time. I'm just taking this into it. But if we get revoked, there's repercussions in the minute that happens, I suspect. In all parties, it will affect us. And though this could be a great idea on the table, and who's to say it might stick, but I think there'll be some damage done. So I'm just saying that in terms of how one defines timing. And it's hard, as we've admitted, there have been distractions, and we're really working hard to stay on task. I just want to say that.
So along those lines, I would advocate for us thinking what are the assets and what are the liabilities of today's proposal. And then again, the deliberation about it, just what do each of us think? possibly next week for another board meeting, that we have a definitive set of questions and/or wonderings about the proposal going forward, and then make a decision based on our deliberations here about the timing that Gordon brought up. And I thought that was a very astute question, because they don't want to be caught off guard any more than we like it. So preempting that jolt by giving them a week or so to look at it, particularly with Bellingham Chester, might serve us well as we go to the meeting on the 18th.
You know, just a comment on that, Art, I would try and find out, I would not try and get too hung up on any single proposal. I think the detail of it is much too big a question. There are too many pieces of it, from, you know, the creation of boards, authority of boards, hiring practices. There's just so many elements to it. And I think that the biggest question is much more straightforward, and it's one that should really hopefully go out from this meeting, where we have the press with us this evening. And the question is, are those who are decision makers interested in finding a way that moves this to a different level? One that's about collaboration, one that's about choice continuing in Gloucester, one that's about teaching and learning and kids, and moving away from what the history of this last 2.5 years effort, which I can assure you has been not only hard on everyone in the building, everyone at this table, and I mean everyone at this table, including people with cameras and, you know, opposition leaders. It's been a long, hard slog. And are we really going to go down as being the great benefit of it is a permanent divide in the city? Kids who are definitely damaged, parents who are worried about their kids' education and not feeling part of the city, that at some levels has ostracized them in policies and approaches. Is that really where we want to be? Or is there, do people want to, because actually presenting this went sort of outside of standard process, we're presenting of an idea, but that's where we're at. We're in the 9th hour, and as adults in a community, professionals, there's an opportunity to move the dialogue somewhere else.
I don't think we're in the 9th hour, I think we're in the 6th hour, because I think we have a pretty good chance of surviving revocation.
Tony, I completely agree with you. I actually feel you can lay out the historical elements of it, comparisons with other schools that are in this level of development, look at where they have, look at the, you know, all that. I've been doing that for the last several weeks. Believe me, I have deep historic data for fighting this. What I like about this, and I just want to sort of leave it out there permanently on the record, is I think there are really good people in this city who care about kids and learning and education. And every single person in this room at these tables believes that. And are they ready to actually step forward and try and sit at a table together and work something out, and that's the legacy for everybody? Because I believe that's possible. And I don't know if it's definitely going to go that way. But when I listen to David, he's saying, you know, even if you do that, we stay adversarial, we continue using, whether it's, you know, building processes, open meeting law, queries, all of the rest of it, it stays adversarial. And, you know, there's a potential here to have something which is much deeper and much better. That's all I'm saying. And so I don't think to get cut on the detail is a really good idea right now. I think it's about finding out from those who would have to come to the table, is there an interest in doing that? And is there an interest on the part of the Department of Education in it? Because there's all sorts of agendas here that haven't had a whole lot to do with Gloucester, no matter what school you're talking about. You know, and are they interested in supporting and facilitating such a meeting? Or are the doors closed and the conversation's over? And that'll tell you a whole lot right there.
James, can I make a motion to schedule a meeting for next
We
week?
don't need a motion for this. We don't need a motion. Okay. This is not a government oversight issue. It's just like, we just do it. You know, we sent out a notice.
We agree that we should.
Well, I think it seems to me that there's a strong interest in this, given the level of discussion that's gone on. And we can certainly try and schedule one based on, there's some other meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks between program and governance and finance and everything else. So if it's, it's getting to be a tough time of year to schedule things, but we can certainly work on this, for the sake of the discussion. I would say this, before we go, schedule a meeting, I would ask Dave, are there some authorities and some sites that we can look at? Can you send us something that sort of gives us a little bit of background on what we're talking about? What we're looking at, oh, they are? Okay.
Yeah, there's a link in here at the very end. There's a, what I call a horseman fact sheet, and there's a link to the statute. There's regulations that go along with it. And if you go to the charter schools page on the department's website, there's a whole section about, about a number of things, but we'll talk about horse fans as well.
Okay, can I task all the board members to spend a little time this weekend? One of the proceedings and getting with this, so when we get prepared, whenever this next meeting is.
I know you guys all refer to me as Donkey Boy, but he's now Horseman.
Just this point of order, Mr. Chair,
Yes.
we went straight from item 5 to item 7, which I assume the discussion we've just had fell under item 7 in terms of the board has been invited to discuss school current status with the charter office, and so a discussion that was around something that might be.
Would you like to make a motion to go back to item 6?
Well, I was just going to
I'll
suggest
second
that.
that motion if you want to make it.
So we get back on the,
I'm sorry, there's been a lot of things that are referential to, the whole reason we had this meeting today was because of the CSO meeting. So are we feeling that we've had our charter school, our CSO meeting discussion? All right, well, if that's the case, then we'll consider that agenda item resolved. And then we'll back up one to the item number 6, review and discussion concerning the short-term loan of September 2001.
11.
I'm sorry, thanks. This is a discussion with a lot of levels on it, and I'll talk for a little bit, and then we can have some discussion about that. Certainly invite everyone to chime in with ideas. The school, just to put the framework in about financing, we don't get funded up front. We get funded in arrears. I think that's important for everyone to know. Like a lot of businesses, we have our own, accounts receivable that take, 30, 60, 90 days to come to us. In our case, it's a 90-day account where we get paid, 90 days after we've started our business. It's a difficult model to work under. It requires a need for a line of credit to be set up because you're not starting day zero with money, you're starting day zero with zero. There are grants and funds available to help charter schools start up, and those go so far, but there's always the risk that you come to the end of your term before the next big tuition reimbursement payment happens, and there's no money in the account. So to that end, I think we've done well with some of the funding that came in. We're able to manage that funding span, if you will. But what became apparent is that we really did need a line of credit because we were a bigger school the second year than the first, obviously. And we did pursue several standard commercial bank and trust type companies. One of them that came to the school to visit with the full team, the senior lender there just came right out and said right in the meeting, we're not going to lend to you because we view you as a new business, a new startup without the credit history or the payment history to make the payment. Another one that we'd actually gone quite far down the road with was then stated that because of the ongoing lawsuit that we were not extended credit to because the risk was too great. You can argue with both of those discussions. You can say in the case of the bank that said we were a new business, well, actually we're a double-A rated credit because our money comes from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Or in the case of the the charter school the litigation, you could say, well, you've got one judge that would say he would not close the school in a year to be equitable, and you had another, this bigger judge who said he would not close the school, period, because this is not the proper remedy against the action taken against the Department of Education. But it doesn't matter what we think. It matters what the bankers think, and we weren't getting anywhere with them. So discussions began with Tony as executive director, and with many of us who were in finance being apprised of what was going on, that there would be a discussion with other individuals, other organizations that might look more favorably upon us, because if there is, some of them were charter schools themselves, or individuals charter schools. And I think at one point you and Tony had a discussion with the charter school office itself to discuss what some of the options were. One of the options was with another charter school who was seriously going to consider going to the board with loan approval. And just as a side note, interestingly, the interest rate for that loan would have been 3%. So there was a precedent. I'm just going to throw that in. It's an important point that a lot of people make. What we were looking for was a bridge loan. We had no other lenders available, and I think, and we had a time issue on our hands. And in any case, in any normal business, when you need something quickly, you pay more for it. Whether it's a construction job or whether it's FedExing a package across the United States, it's the unfortunate aspect of the position we're in. So anyway, so that's how we got there. There's also another level to this, which is the governance and process. There's a whole. One of the responsibilities of management is procurement, and I think Aaron comes from that background. This September meeting, we give Tony that authority to do that. We trust him. We support him to negotiate these, and then he reports back to us and says, "This is what I'm doing." There's nothing untoward or unusual about it. That's the way governance is separated from management. That's how it works. At the time, the loan coming in was absolutely needed. It allowed us to make payroll. We should be very happy about that. Now, the issue that became up later was the person who lent us the money, a year and several months later, ended up being part of the site. Now, we don't choose that person. The state chooses that person. And there's a question raised concerning conflicts. And with that, I had a long discussion with the press about this a couple weeks ago. And I think it's important to not to get too nuanced about this, but the essence of the conflict is where you have decision-making authority over bodies. And again, I'm not going to get too deep into this because I think this is a little too textbook-like, but a person, when you're a trustee, for example, you actually make decisions. You make decisions as a board. And as trustees, we're required to fill out a financial disclosure every year. I mean, if you're a brand trustee, it says, what did you do? And you have any dealings with the body over which you have decision-making control over the last year. There's 2 points here about conflicts: decision-making control, and the Commonwealth itself chooses the year as the sort of tolling period. I think that in both those cases, it's really up to the state to sort of put that kind of process into place if they decided that her role was in fact a decision-making one. I'm not sure that, as we discussed, since this all happened, that it's possible to have a bias because of something. There are plenty of people in the process. We have 2 people on the Board of Education who do nothing but vote against charter schools all the time. It doesn't stop them from sitting on the board for their biases. Anyway, I'm not going to nuance this too much. I've heard so much stuff about this situation, and I think that the context is everything, like it is with so many other things. Fortunately, we have a good line of credit now because we found a bank to file it, but we never would have found that one time. And this is kind of resourcefulness, I think, that the executive director doesn't get enough credit for, because we really needed to do something, and it happened as a result. And this is, again, we're in a situation where our funding is always kind of in the balance. We don't know. It's always going to be a question, and we always have to be as responsive as we can, given the options that we have. I don't mean to dominate this discussion. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and ask. Aaron, you're in procurement. Why is this different, than
And obviously,
hiring somebody or?
obviously I wasn't on the board at the
No,
time,
of course not.
but, again, I look at it as the board gave Tony the directive of handling the finances accordingly, and he procured a loan. Again, if there was, in my opinion, if there was any fault, the state should be looking more at their reviewers, asking questions. And on top of it, it was a year after the loan was,
The state's own criteria, so.
Well, I think just to, be really clear about it, you have two separate pieces here. One is the quite legitimate issue raised and whether there should be a different vetting process or step with regard to reviewers who are going to be in a panel, and that's a State Department issue. In terms of loan, very straightforward bridge loan. The materials that we put together to approach the various banks were put together with input from Rick Crowley, who was finance manager at the time. Cindy Marie had just come on board, with input from the chair of the board, and Art Bean and I were all part of putting those materials together to present to the banks. The banks all found, which should be remembered in terms of putting in context the generosity really of this individual and the risk they were taking. Every financial institution had said no. So in terms of even a bridge loan, and with the state indicating, because what actually happened is first went to the banks. Banks all said no. Then I contacted the Department of Education, and I spoke directly to Jeff Wilson at the department and asked him about an advance on our payment, because they know what the payment is we're going to get on September 30th. So he thought initially it wasn't any problem, indicated that was the case, and we should simply submit the request. We submitted the request, and he found out in the intervening time that actually those types of advances are only available to charters in their first year. So even though we're actually only in our 10th month at the time, it was the beginning of the second fiscal year, and so we fell into the second category. So they couldn't make an advance, so they provided us with a letter indicating our September 30th payment to give to any creditor. At that point, we're down to talking to individuals and to other schools or foundations that might give us a bridge loan. And one other charter school indicated they might be able to do it that had a foundation. And so the foundation might consider making a loan, but it would take a board process. And then the single individual, and she was willing to do it. And so, that was the context in which the decisions were made. The promissory note, which is note again is a standard financial tool. It's actually used by municipalities on a regular basis unless they have an established credit line. All of that can be checked at both the Inspector General and the Attorney General's office. Charters have slightly different rules under which they're governed by, with a little more flexibility. But essentially what happened at that point is we asked, I again contacted the Department of Education, asked Cindy Marie, the central source business manager, and we asked, we've got these two possibilities. It was indicated to us we were much better to be going with a private individual rather than an institution, even with a separate foundation where they had some of their monies came from tax dollars. And so we went with the private individual. We had legal counsel draw up the promissory note and delivered the promissory note, got the loan and paid the loan back immediately, which is what a bridge loan is all about. So since December 30th payment came in, we made the payment back. And so there should be absolutely no question around this. Very standard business practice and not something that should be in question. And really, I have to say that, being without questions for clarity, unfortunately, Ms. Lamb's motivations said it could be called into question. And she really was a key resource to the school at a key moment. Again, where every financial institution does this professionally and indicate that they felt that even with a letter from the state indicating what our September 30th payment was, that they either couldn't put it together fast enough for us or that it would not get approved. And so she was willing to step forward and unfortunately has paid the price for that. The issue around the site visit was a full year later. There was no loan, no further conflict there. She had, at that point, no other connection with the school, and I never met her. So, it's not like there was some relationship here or anything. And I think the question around the site visit and whether the state should have some different process there that's more in keeping with boards who indicate if there's any conflict, that's a good question that should be responded to. And the commissioner took that on board at the meeting and said he felt that that was something that should be looked at. So.
And exactly, and then the key conflict issues, it's all well going to talk about conflict, but the essence of the conflict is decision-making power. And it's, again, we're talking about a reviewer, not someone who's voting on the future of a particular institution. Okay, any other questions about that? All right, okay, so let's go on to the next item. Item number 8, lease adjustments. As you can see, I have here a note about entry into executive session. I just wanted to say, I guess as board chair, I am charged with exploring things that will preserve, benefit, maintain the school. And certainly finance is one of the most important ones, especially with the charter school, given the way that our funding operates. And giving the fact, I don't want to repeat history here, but we've always had a very, very, very strong commitment to Beth's vision of a very full program that Tony and Beth put together in terms of developing the school and really thinking, well, this is really the way to bring people into the prior year where there was tremendous discord and turnover, and we realized that for us to succeed, we really need to have everything in place. And we have 2 excellent people that put everything together for that. When the enrollment numbers came in, when they did, we knew right away, and it was well publicized, and this is there, that we were, based on our numbers, going to have a hard time getting it. So what are your choices when this happens? We can start making cuts right away, or we can increase enrollment, or we can do something to shore up your finance. We decided that cuts were not acceptable because we really want to preserve the culture that we put together. And we put a very, very strong effort into increasing enrollment, option number 2. When we had our first open house, we did bring in a few people. It was terrific. We had our second open house right before Thanksgiving, which was a very robust effort. 150 phone calls were made. David, Mark, Tony, others, staff, faculty. There was a very good showing. We had actually 10 people express interest in attending next year. It doesn't really help us that much, but it's a wonderful thing to see early in the year. For mid-fall, we had people say they want to come to school next year. So it's not bad. But it didn't solve the problem of the fact that we have a very, very good gap. And we didn't want to start making cuts, we weren't going to get more people in. So my thought in doing the executive session was we have one big creditor, and that's our landlord. And the question is, what can we do to ease up the debt that we have to him and the money that goes to him. And I expected that we would, I've had several discussions about what we can do. At the end of my last discussion yesterday, I determined that there was not a need for a lot of negotiations, and therefore there'd be no need for an executive session to do this. And that's what I'll just do right now, is tell you where we are with this. Okay. Our landlord has agreed to make considerable rent concessions. He's clearly very aligned. Our success is his success, our liability is his liability in terms of this site. In order to have us be able to present a balanced budget that the finance committee can approve and present for ratification, either to amend the lease or to work out a reduction in rent or postpone the rent, both. That will basically give us a relief for the next 6 months completely. This is going to require further discussion about how we make that up. If someplace we do have to pay. He has also offered a reduction. He has his costs maintained the building, and then he charges a certain rent. That's how every landlord makes money, the differential between the two figures. And one of the terms in that is to go to I just need to cover my costs scenario. And that, coupled with deferring, postponing the next 6 months, will balance our budget. I guess what I'd like to do right now is, and that will allow us to keep a full program in place. Now again, who knows what happens in terms of any potential things. We may have a budget cut again after last year. Budgets change all the time. This is not like your household budget where you've got one person who makes so much money and one person who makes another, and you sort of know your vacations and everything. This has got so many more moving parts. Every large entity does. So it's impossible to say what's going to happen, but I think given his willingness to move forward under that basic framework, what I'd like to ask the board to do is to enter a motion to authorize me to enter into a memorandum of understanding under these preliminary terms, so we can provide a term sheet to the CSO and the board to show that of the 3 key elements we've been talking about: enrollment, evidence-based action plans, and finance, that we have our finance in good shape. So what I'm asking the board now is to give me the authority to continue to finalize, memorialize the memorandum of understanding the agreement that we report out. Any questions, first of all? Let me answer some of them. This will mean probably changing the lease. This will mean most definitely amended the lease of some kind. It could be, this money could be amortized over a year or 2 years. I think the landlord was for a year, so that would be something that we could discuss more. But we sort of know what his terms are in terms of the amount of money that he wants to help us get through, because we know what our gap is between now and the year.
So just for clarity,
Yeah.
James said, it
Yeah.
sounds like you're looking at ask for.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a motion to empower you to continue to work on this, to ultimately come back with what could end up being a adjustment to the lease, to, I would assume, the finance committee first.
Exactly, yes, Tony.
A recommendation of the finance committee to the board, with the full implications of it would actually be reviewed by the finance committee and then ultimately by the board. But what you're really looking for is a motion to empower you
Yes.
to continue to put
Yeah.
something.
We are 99%. We've gone a very long way. I think we have most of the understanding in place. There's really not much negotiation. We know what he's going to give us. We know, fairly certainly what we have to give him back. It's just a question of the time. So, yeah, this is pretty, we've come, this is not required a lot of negotiation. His interests are very much aligned with ours. He's motivated, interested, he wants his school.
Well, so would the motion be then, since it sounds like there will be a board meeting next week,
Yeah.
that there should be a finance committee meeting and a board meeting next week?
Yeah, right.
That in the meantime, if you needed a motion from the board to empower you to work to put together a document for review by the finance
Exactly.
committee, and then a recommendation from them to the board, and possible motion by the board to approve a lease amendment which will allow the full maintenance of the educational program and the balance.
So the memorandum of understanding, basically the 4 corners of the document, will say, we're doing this, we're doing that, but we have time to discuss the exact details for that. A lot of this is because time is of the essence right now.
Okay, so the motion,
To enter
you're asking for a motion to empower you to develop a memorandum of understanding which will be presented for approval at the next board.
Exactly. It's finance committee first. Yes, Karen.
We have a contract, and you're allowed to modify a contract, but I don't know is under the procurement rules and laws,
All right.
how that's done. I know you're allowed to do it, I haven't done it. I know my experience, my personal experience, is that you're allowed to negotiate downward, you can never negotiate upward.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, but I don't know, this is a different animal,
Yeah,
so I guess we need to ask some questions
yeah.
to cover ourselves on that.
Sure.
aspect.
Now, first of all, we're not looking for a new vendor.
Correct.
Relationships.
But we're modifying existing
We're modifying
contracts
existing
that we already
contracts.
have.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
therefore, you're changing
Yeah.
the bid, so to speak,
But,
in my words, so how would I do it?
no,
You're modifying,
we're modifying what we
you're
have.
modifying an existing
Yeah.
contract, so
Exactly.
there isn't.
And then we're definitely going down, because again, we're talking about reimbursing first cost, not, you know.
Right, right.
So you're just asking, you're basically saying that whatever memorandum of understanding is developed should be run through legal counsel.
Correct.
Be assured
of
it
course,
meets
yeah,
all
absolutely,
requirements.
yes. There's clearly a lot of steps we just.
Because we, obviously, it's modifying the contract, and will then be, I mean, obviously, it's gonna be, the money's eventually gonna be paid.
Right.
It's just what mechanism it's paid in, and what term it's paid in.
Well, some good news, though, it sounds like, is you have a solution to
Well, it again allows us to one of the three legs of the stool, if you will, is,
financial
is
liability.
safe and sound. Is that a motion?
No,
Did you
clause
just make
has
the
to work
motion?
as a motion, so if someone would like to make a motion that the board empower the chair of the board to continue to develop a draft memorandum of understanding that has the agreement of the landlord for review at the next finance committee meeting and board meeting with the expectation of a motion.
So, the word motion hasn't been used yet, that was a suggested idea of.
No, I think I should say
That's
that.
his
I
motion.
did say
That's
that.
his motion.
I did, yeah.
That's the motion.
Jay was giving me the eye to do
If
it.
that's
so.
the motion. Any discussion? All in favor?
I just wanted to say, James, I just wanted to express our gratitude to you for this kind of effort, sort of going through, this. And I also think all of us know what a stand-up guy Mick Raffatta is, and how much the school owes to him. And I wish more people in Boston knew.
He's the best guy, and he cares about the place.
Yeah.
So, I won't say it's on me either. You know, we've had, it's, you know, we, they, this board have interacted with him, and you know, he's kind of generous in spirit. He's very strong.
Yeah, it's very clear in any interaction I have with Rick that he's behind the school for more reasons, really, the lease and financial agreements. It's a lot deeper than that. And James, I just want to echo what Jay has said as well, but I know pretty well how much time you've burned on this, with a full-time job, with other commitments in the community, with the family. You burn weekends and many hours.
Very much, thank you, board. This is a wonderful board to work with, and I truly hope that the result of this is that it allows us to continue our work together. That's my hope.
So you need to change your phone number tomorrow.
Okay, so with that, agenda, let's see, consider, item 9, consideration of the next agenda. Thank you, Art, for these notes. So the CSO meeting, that would be a review, provided the next agenda is within, say, the next 7 or 9 business days from now. Put that in the file.
Dave's
proposal, okay. And then the finance committee will send up an agreement, because we have to have a couple other board meetings, committee meetings as well. Can you just follow on the topic, are there any other committee meetings happening in the next?
I think we should concentrate on the finance
Well,
and the board.
okay,
Princeton program are scheduled to meet next Thursday night.
I don't want to build a football field for next year.
Okay.
Yeah, right. The other thing we need to do, James, is
Yeah.
to renew the board term.
Yes, we have board term.
So Steve Colleague, Ira Gaffner. And we should also do that with Aaron as well.
Yes, and also, and this is something else, we need to do one more open meeting law. We've done our public document, we need to do one more as well.
Training,
So
right?
we need to do our training.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Because that's 5 or 6 items, and if we have any more, I think, we can always add them later, unless anyone has anything that's urgent.
Well, why don't we do this? Everybody knows that we may need some more agenda items. Can we just send them
Absolutely,
to
yeah, I
us?
just want to make sure that we keep our eye on privacy in terms of the important ones that really
Yeah.
need to be done.
Do I have to go through initiation again, or? Hell night?
And the other thing is that last year, because that's, maybe we can do also best state of the school, and address also that. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8.
So why don't you keep that?
I will, thanks. Thank you very much. Okay, that being said, will I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Any discussion?